This talk is going to be about feeding the future and solving the protein dilemma with the help of AI. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker, Mr. Arturo Elizondo, who is the co-founder and CEO of the Every Co company. Arturo, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Charlene. Hi, everyone. As Charlene mentioned, I'm Arturo Elizondo, founder and CEO of the Every Company. We're based in California in the heart of Silicon Valley. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can turbocharge biology with the help of AI to answer one of the world's most pressing questions, which is how do we feed 10 billion people in a way that doesn't destroy the planet in the process? For those who don't know, at Every, we make animal protein without using a single animal. And so I'll talk a little bit about us as a case study for how we can apply biology and AI to feed a growing population. Over the last 8 years, we've invested around $100 million to develop this technology and make it a reality. And so you'll get a glimpse of that today. It's really cool to be here back in Geneva because I was here 11 years ago, and this is actually where my obsession with food kicked in. I had left Harvard, and I came here to study diplomacy, and I came across this chart. I was fascinated with economic development, but I didn't quite fully realize the unintended consequences of that economic development. You see, as countries and people enter the middle class, the first thing they do is that they buy animal protein. There's almost a one-to-one correlation between GDP per capita and animal protein consumption. And so I realized that if we didn't fundamentally transform the way that we made animal protein at scale, we were gonna write ourselves off a cliff. And I'll share a little bit more about that here. But China, for example, when I was here 11 years ago, there was this big article that came up, which is how I came across this graph, which said China has now doubled its own meat consumption and now consumed more than double the amount of meat of the US. And a big part of that was the unintended consequences of economic development. And the more I researched, the more I realized how destructive industrial scale animal agriculture was. Most people don't know this, but 3/4 of the world's agricultural land is dedicated to growing animal protein. It's the number one cause of deforestation on Earth, the number one cause of extinction on the planet. And that is in large part because it's not just the animals growing the animals themselves, but all of the incredibly resource-intensive crops. The majority of soy that is deforesting the Amazon rainforest is not used to make tofu to feed people. It's actually used as feed for animals. This one's quite timely for us. 3 out of every 4 emerging infectious diseases like COVID, like SARS, MERS, swine flu, avian flu, are all zoonotic. That means they're traced back to our relationship to animals. And so the more that it emits more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector, than all the cars, planes, ships, boats in the world combined. And when I realized just how incredibly destructive the way that we produce animal protein today was, I knew I had to do everything I could to help mitigate these challenges. And as I researched what I could be doing, it was clear that for all those like us who care about impact, right, for those who care about sustainability, fixing our protein challenge is the single biggest, most effective and efficient way of decarbonizing our planet, meeting our Paris climate agreements, and ultimately combating climate change. And because of how destructive large-scale animal agriculture is, it has a direct impact on 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals. It also touches 3 of the others, for a total of 9 out of the 17. Over half of the SDGs will be impacted and helped and supported if we can solve the way that we produce animal protein today. And so when we talk about alternative proteins, like what do we actually mean? Most of you are probably, who here is aware of plant proteins? So most of you either have hopefully consumed them or at least been exposed to them. And who here has read about cell cultured meat? Okay, lots of hands. So most of you either have tried or been exposed to plant proteins. Many of you have probably read about cell-based meat, but the one that I want to focus on today is fermentation, which is using microorganisms to produce animal protein. And what I love about this technology is that it really gave us the best of both worlds. Like plants, it's an existing technology. It's been around for 40 years. It's been scaled globally, giving us the highest likelihood of success when it comes to addressing global hunger at scale. But unlike plants, when you use deep tech, in this case cells or fermenters or microorganisms, to produce these proteins, you can get to products that don't compromise, that deliver on the taste, the texture, the consumer experience, that enable us to drive adoption far faster for people who otherwise wouldn't consume these plant-based proteins. And so this felt like a silver bullet when it came to scaling and having an impact. And so what does this technology actually mean? How do you use a microorganism to make animal protein at scale? So typically, the way that animal protein production works today is that you always start with a gene, with DNA, right? So unlike computers, right, that use zeros and ones for code, the code of life is DNA, right? It's the 4 magical letters of A, T, C, and G. And every protein known to man is broken down into those 4 letters. Those genes find their way, or for different animals, right? In this case, egg protein genes are in the chicken. That chicken then is consuming very water-intensive grain. It takes, on average, over 2,000 liters of water to make a dozen eggs. The chicken consumes this very water-intensive grain, starts the cells in the chicken start reading that DNA sequence, start consuming the sugar and start reading the DNA sequence, and then start producing the protein. It takes generations to optimize, right, through selective breeding to get the chickens to be even more efficient. Back then, chickens would lay 2 to 3 dozen eggs a year. Today, chickens lay over 300 eggs per year. But we've almost over-optimized that system. You need generations to do that, but these chickens produce eggs which have all of the different egg proteins. Now, this is where fermentation gets interesting. So the way that fermentation works is we start with the same DNA sequence, but we 3D print it, we synthesize it. And instead of that being in the chicken, we feed that to a yeast. And so in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make beer and wine, or bakers, right, use yeast to convert sugar into carbon dioxide to leaven bread, yeast can also be used to convert sugar into protein. Ours actually comes from an oak tree in California, and it naturally makes protein. But when you feed the yeast a specific DNA sequence, it starts acting like a computer and starts reading the DNA and starts actually printing out the specific protein that you've instructed it to produce. It uses far less resources to convert the same carbon into protein. And then we add this layer of AI, which I'll talk about later, to further optimize it. Put it in a fermenter, brew it for a week, and out comes the specific egg proteins or animal proteins of choice. The beauty of it is that the yeast is inherently more efficient because unlike a chicken, right, you grow it, it starts growing feathers, a beak, starts pooping and walking around. A yeast is actually a lot more efficient. It just starts converting that sugar into protein. So it's inherently more efficient, and without having to breed generations, we can use AI to actually accelerate the development and make it even more efficient and affordable. But what most people don't realize is that egg eggs don't just have one protein, which is albumin. There are over 200 different proteins in a single egg. And when the chicken makes an egg, it makes all 200. And so who here eats eggs? Who here ate an egg this week? Who ate a cookie or a cake? They're in everything. So when you eat an egg, you eat the weighted average of all of those proteins. But every protein has its own unique amino acid profile, its own unique functionality, foaming, binding, gelation, and that's why you can use eggs in everything. And we use our AI to hand select the most functional or most nutritional proteins because there are proteins in the egg that are actually not great for us. There's a protein in the egg white called avidin that actually can bind to biotin. And so there are some anti-nutrients that exist in the food that we eat today because when you think about an egg, it wasn't really made for us, right? And eggs were made to support the life of a baby chick. They just so happen to be very bioavailable for humans. But what if we could actually design food for humans? And that's what entering the age of molecular food is what allows us to be able to create food with far more precision, make them more nutritious for people or more functional for different applications. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. The chicken is the reason why we use the chicken and why over 1 trillion eggs are consumed every year in the world is because it's the cheapest egg, the cheapest bird to farm at scale. But if you're not using chickens anymore, you can tap into all the different egg laying species. There's over 80,000 egg laying species. And each of those eggs has hundreds of proteins that have their own unique functionalities and nutritional properties that we don't even know. In the egg today, out of the 200 proteins, there are some that haven't even been named. This is a food that we've been eating for hundreds of years. We know so little about the food that we're putting into our bodies every single day. And so where our AI kind of kicks in is the new generation of products that we can develop. So there are proteins, for example, in penguins that that have antifreeze properties because eggs have to stay liquid in Antarctica. And so you have to have different kinds of proteins in different environments to deliver certain functionalities for the different environment. And I'll share one case study of one of the proteins that we've actually already commercialized, which is a protein that's currently found in the egg white. It is the most soluble protein found in the egg, but it has no eggy taste and has no eggy flavor. But it's incredibly high. It's incredibly high in digestibility. And when you concentrate it, it actually, because it's so soluble, it becomes like a honey. And it looks like this. Let me see. Which you can see here. My friend Eitan, or my colleague, for the first 20 people, you'll be able to taste. He'll be serving. You actually will be able to taste the first egg white protein made without using a chicken. So after the talk, get in line and you'll get to taste it and let me know what you think. But it's just an incredible idea of like how we can reimagine protein delivery altogether. Because when you ask people where they get their protein from, what do they say? Meat, right? Eggs. They say, cheese maybe or seafood. But what if you could have your protein in your morning coffee or your wine at night when you're chilling? We can reimagine what that looks like. But I think perhaps one of the most unique applications for this technology is how we can use it for humanitarian purposes. Each of these packets has around 25 to 27 grams of protein, which means 2 of these a day will give the protein needed for an adult human. So think about disaster areas, right? How it has a protein content of over 20 egg whites. So you can concentrate protein and make it really accessible. You can find ways to address communities that need it the most. And this may seem like science fiction, but it is, or too good to be true, but it is real. It is happening. We've been selling in the US for the last several years, and we're just beginning to start ramping up production. There's some of the products that we've launched already. If you come by California, Silicon Valley, let me know. I'm happy to give you a tour of our labs. Thank you.